Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from the National Garden in Athens, Greece on May 28, 2025 for Reason to Resist. As Reason to Resist reported last week, on May 19th, the British, French, and Canadian governments took the extraordinary step of explicitly threatening targeted sanctions and concrete actions against Israel if it did not stop its relentless settlement expansion in the occupied West Bank and did not cease its obstruction of the delivery of humanitarian aid to the civilian population of Gaza. Since then, despite a litany of new atrocities by the genocidal entity, none of these governments has imposed a single sanction on the state of Israel or any of its civilian or military leaders, nor has any of them taken what could fairly be described as a concrete action against those actors. The closest that any of them took to taking a concrete action against Israel is that on May 20th, the British government of Keir Starmer announced with much fanfare and psychodrama in the British Parliament that it was suspending trade talks with Israel. Predictably, the foreign ministry of the genocidal entity reacted with scorn and contempt to Britain's toothless measure. In a statement issued quickly following the British government's announcement, the genocidal entity's foreign ministry stated, quote, "The British mandate ended exactly 77 years ago. External pressure will not divert Israel from its path in the struggle for its existence and security against enemies seeking its destruction." Even before today's announcement, the matter had not been advanced at all by the current British government. The trade agreement, Israel said, is mutually beneficial, and if, quote, due to an anti-Israel obsession and domestic political considerations, the British government is willing to harm the British economy, that is its decision. The arrogance of these Israelis knows no bounds. Suspending trade talks with Israel, whose economy is a pipsqueak compared to that of Britain, is not going to cause significant damage to Britain's economy. But the British government stopped caring long ago, apparently, about Israel's deranged arrogance. Hours after the Starmer regime suspended trade talks with the economic pipsqueak, Britain sent yet another spy plane over Gaza from its Akrotiri military base on the southern coast of Cyprus. As Reason to Resist has reported on several occasions, Britain and the US have used that colonial-era military base to send gigantic quantities of weapons to Israel throughout the genocide. So how has the genocidal entity behaved since Canada, France, and the United Kingdom issued their unprecedented but unfulfilled threat on May 19th? Well, here's a sampling of the abominations committed by the genocidal entity over the past 9 days. And believe me, my friends, this is not an exhaustive list. On May 21st, on national television no less, Moshe Feiglin, a former member of Israel's parliament, said, quote, "The enemy is not Hamas, nor is it the military wing of Hamas. Every child in Gaza is the enemy. We need to occupy Gaza and settle it, and not a single Gazan child will be left there. There is no other victory," close quote. On that same day, video evidence emerged of Israeli forces obliterating an exhausted Palestinian who was carrying his belongings through the devastation of Gaza's streets. Also on May 21st, Israeli forces fired what they described as warning shots at diplomats from 25 countries, including Canada and many European states. As we reported last week on Reason to Resist, the likely reason for which these criminals fired upon the foreign diplomats was that they were approaching the entrance to the Jenin refugee camp, which Israel has terrorized, demolished, and entirely depopulated in the past 19 months. Evidently, the genocide forces did not want the diplomats to see the evidence of their handiwork in Jenin. May 21st was quite a day, even by the depraved standards of Israel. Apart from all the horrors I've recounted and others that I haven't mentioned, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz published a shocking poll on that day. The poll, conducted by Penn State University, found that 47% of Israeli Jews support killing all Gazans in cities captured by the Israeli genocide forces. Presumably, all Gazans includes the children and the babies. The poll also found that 82% of Israeli Jews support the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, which would be and is a crime against humanity, while a solid majority of 56% support the expulsion from Israel itself of its Arab citizens, constituting approximately 20% of the population of Israel. On the following day, May 22nd, Deputy Knesset Speaker Nissim Vaturi, a member of Netanyahu's Likud party, called for Israel's genocide forces to execute all male adults in Gaza. For good measure, Vaturi called Palestinians scumbags and subhumans and said that nobody in the world wants Gaza's civilians. He also threatened to turn Jenin into Gaza, which Israel has pretty much already done, and he urged Israeli troops in Jenin not to arrest what he called terrorists there, but to burn them alive in their own homes. While Vaturi was spewing his genocidal venom, Israeli settler terrorists, under the watchful eye of Israel's military, expelled 150 Palestinians from their village in the occupied West Bank. On May 24th, an Israeli airstrike destroyed the home of a Palestinian doctor in Gaza while she was treating victims of Israel's savagery. The airstrike massacred 9 of her 10 children. On the following day, May 25th, ex-Israeli detainee Naam Levy told a protest rally in Tel Aviv that her greatest fear while in captivity in Gaza was not Hamas, but Israeli airstrikes. This statement adds to the mountain of evidence that Israel's destruction of Gaza has nothing to do with saving Israeli captives and in fact constitutes an existential threat to Israeli captives. On May 25th, we also learned that the head of a US-backed private organization, which had been tasked by Israel's genocidal regime with distributing paltry amounts of aid in Gaza, had resigned. He said it had become, quote, clear that it is not possible to implement Israel's plan while also strictly adhering to the humanitarian principles of humanity, neutrality, impartiality, and independence, which I will not abandon. On Monday, May 26, Israel's cowardly psychopathic Air Force bombed a school in Gaza that had been turned into a shelter. The attack, which was conducted as victims slept and which set their belongings ablaze, massacred at least 36 people and wounded many more. Also on May 26, dozens of Israeli Jewish teens marched through Old Jerusalem shouting, "Death to Arabs." On May 27th, the American mercenaries whom Israel had tasked with distributing paltry amounts of aid in Gaza made crowds of starving Palestinians wait in the blazing sun for scraps of food. Eventually, the desperate but unarmed Palestinians lost their patience with this humiliation and caused the so-called aid workers to flee. At that point, Israel's genocide forces began firing near the starving Palestinians. Now, as I said, what you've just heard from me is merely a sampling of Israel's abominations during the past 9 days and is nowhere near to an exhaustive list. How have the British, Canadian, and French governments reacted to these monstrosities? Have they imposed any targeted sanctions? Have they taken anything that could fairly be described as a concrete action? The answer, my friends, is that they have done nothing. Zilch. Nada. Butkus. Rien. What in God's name are these people waiting for? 1 million dead Palestinians? What will it take for these charlatans to finally lift a finger in defense of the devastated Palestinian people? Now, there just might be an innocent explanation for their inaction. After all, during the past week, French President Emmanuel Macron was coping with the trauma of having been mugged by his own wife on an airplane. Meanwhile, Canadian Prime Minister Goldman Sachs was gazing adoringly at an aging, decrepit monarch of a decaying empire. And Keir Starmer, or I should say Sir Keir Starmer, was doing his utmost to stifle disturbing questions about why 3 young Ukrainian men were obsessed with setting fire to vehicles and other property linked to the British Prime Minister. I thought Starmer was a dear friend of the Ukrainian people. In the final analysis, my friends, it should be obvious to any fair-minded person why these momentous developments deserve far more attention from Western elites than a mere genocide. After all, genocide is boring, at least when the victims are non-white. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Athens, Greece on May 28, 2025.